Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, Week 3 in the books, heading into Week 4. Time to update the Big Ten power rankings, heading into a Week 4 slate where, look, we are going to have a lot of movement in the Big Ten power rankings. USC, Michigan, Saturday afternoon. You got Illinois, Nebraska Friday night. I think we're getting to the point of the season where entering Big Ten conference play, like you're starting to figure out what teams are legit, what teams are pretenders. Heading into Week 4, fired up to get into this one. Now, before we do, and as always, most importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Right, last week I had a lot of hot takes. You guys let me hear about it in the comment section. Look, I wouldn't want it any other way. That's what college football is about. So whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start at the top here. Ohio State, I think, the clear number one team in the Big Ten. That's what we had coming in. I think the big storyline coming out of Week 3 was Oregon finally looked like the team we kind of expected them to look like heading into 2024. Like, I took a lot of heat for having Oregon still at number 2 in the power rankings last week. I feel better about having them number 2 now. I still think you could argue that USC has looked better, and even at times Penn State has looked better. That being said, I look at Oregon, I look at the potential of this roster and say I still think it's one of the best rosters, not only in the Big Ten and all of college football. And as they continue to figure it out, I feel pretty comfortable having Oregon number 2. That being said, USC goes on the road, beats Michigan. I think we could be having that conversation come this time next week because USC has looked very good against LSU. They looked very good against Utah State. I think most notably Miller Moss is running this offense at a really high level, which I don't think to USC fans is all that surprising considering what we saw not only from Lincoln Riley's track record with quarterbacks, but also what we saw from Miller Moss in the bowl game against Louisville. But I think the big story is, this USC defense continues to look legit. Penn State coming in at 4, still a national or a Big Ten title contender. My concern about Penn State is, one, the offense is still trying to find itself, which I think we expected with the change at OC, significant changes in terms of the schematics and how they want to run the Penn State offense. So we kind of expected some growing pains. You're still seeing the explosive offense. I don't think it's as efficient as you would like throughout the first couple of games, but it is explosive, and that's what we were, kind of looking for the most. My concern with Penn State, why I have them dropping to number 4, is I don't know if the defense is quite as it's legit still. I ain't gonna say this Penn State defense is not good. Is it as dominant as it was last year? Is it as dominant as a lot of people expected it to be in 2024? That suddenly becomes the question for me. I still think it's a good unit, but is it going to be a top 5, top 3 unit in the country is probably the question that we're asking. Going down to the dark horse, again, you got to keep Michigan there until they can show some life and identity on offense. They'll have an opportunity to do so against USC. And then Nebraska. Look, I think there's a little bit of a separation between Nebraska and the 4 teams in quote unquote title contender spots. This Nebraska team only seems to be getting better as the season goes. They have a massive opportunity to make a statement against Illinois tonight. I would watch out for Nebraska potentially rising up the Big Ten power rankings after this week. And you could say the same thing for Illinois, where, look, Illinois is kind of a tricky team to figure out. They've played 2, I wouldn't say cakewalk opponents, but teams they should have beat handily, and they did so. And then they beat Kansas, which I think at first looked like a really big win for this Illinois team. Upon reevaluation of that win, one, they did get outgained against Kansas. Like, Kansas turned the ball over 4 times. I think that had a lot to do with Illinois winning that football game. And I think, secondly, how good is Kansas? I mean, we just saw Kansas at home lose to UNLV. And so now you're kind of looking at Illinois and say, all right, we're 3-0. We're looking pretty solid. But how good is this Illinois team? How good was that win against Kansas that's now 1-2 on the season? That's probably the question that a lot of us are asking. So we're going to keep Illinois in that tier below. But again, massive opportunity tonight in Lincoln, Nebraska to potentially move up to that dark horse category. Indiana, this one was probably the pick or the team that I was most wrong about heading into the Big Ten this year in 2024. One of y'all in the comment section lit me up for it. And I think you were right. Like, you look at Indiana and say, They're averaging 36.5 points per game. That's top 20 in the country. They're only allowing 10.5 points per game. That's 14th in the country. Curtis Rourke, 75% completion percentage for 755 yards, 7 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. A large part of me kind of sleeping on Indiana was, one, it was a complete roster turnover. So we weren't really sure, one, the quality of players they got in the transfer portal, and is that going to kind of translate to the Big Ten level? But I think number two, like, how is this team going to come together? It's coming together, and it's coming together pretty strong. Now, again, a convincing win against UCLA. I'm not sure how good UCLA is actually as a football team. That being said, you talk about teams that we're starting to trust in the Big Ten. I mean, Indiana's working their way up. So the listener that fed me about having Indiana too low, I think you were right. This Indiana team better than I expected in 2024. Next up in the list, Washington. Disappointing loss against Washington State. They outgained them at 70 yards. They won the turnover battle. Not really sure how Washington lost this game other than going back and saying they left a lot of plays on the table. They obviously committed 16 penalties for 135 yards. I think you run that game back with Washington and Washington State. I think there's a lot of outcomes where Washington wins that football game. I I really do like this Washington offense. Again, well, my biggest question for Washington specifically heading into the Big Ten is the line of scrimmage play. I think Washington, I know the scoreboard doesn't reflect it, 19-24 loss against Washington State. That might actually be a pretty solid football team. But I think, secondly, I think Washington kind of gave that game away. I think they're a lot better than what the scoreboard reflects. I think they, quite frankly, played better on aggregate than what the scoreboard reflected. I have a lot of confidence in Will Rogers. I still have a lot of confidence in Jed Fish. So although 2-1, disappointing loss, I'm not selling my stock on Washington. Going to Iowa, really good defense. Still don't trust the offense. And again, you look at Iowa, I think they're better on offense. I think that's hard to argue. The numbers certainly show that. It's just really hard for me to trust this Iowa team with kind of just a lack of playmakers. I think we wanted to dig in so much to the play calling of Brian Ferentz, and I think, yeah, Brian Ferentz is a bad offensive play caller. I think I could call better plays on Madden. That being said, like he ain't working with the talent he needs to work with to really have a good offense. And so I think the new offensive coordinator hire helps. I still don't think they have the firepower that they need to have an offense that really makes them a dark horse in the Big Ten. Rutgers going to be a really interesting game against Virginia Tech. Again, Rutgers, we say this over and over, kind of reminds of how Michigan played last year. Like, run the football, play it slow, play good defense, and kind of just squeeze out opponents. How good are they along the lines of scrimmage when they start playing high caliber teams? When you play the way Rutgers wants to play, your margins get small, right? And are they going to consistently be able to win games with that kind of play style is probably the question in the Big Ten. That being said, we always say it. This is a Rutgers team that I think a lot of people look on their schedule and say this is not a team you want to play because they are going to drag it into the mud. They're going to run the football and play good defense, and they're going to be in a lot of one-score games. Now the question is, are they going to win those one-score games? Michigan State, massive question marks about, especially the depth on the offensive line. I mean, they're going to be starting, I think, a third-string guard, a third-string tackle this weekend against Boston College, and that was our big question mark about Michigan State heading into 2024 as well, was what does the line of scrimmage play look like? Now, the defense, I think, has impressed me. I think the secondary is playing better. I think the defensive line has been really, really impressive in terms of my preseason expectations of this football team. Aiden Childs he's going to continue to get better. And I think there's a real possibility that Aiden Childs emerges as potentially one of the better quarterbacks that we see in the Big Ten Conference coming the end of the season. You want to see him put it together a little bit more from a consistency standpoint. You want to see them run the football just a little bit more efficiently. Seems like they've relied on some big plays in the run game as opposed to just efficiently working between the tackles. So we have question marks about Michigan State, but we also have some things that we really like about Michigan State as well. Maryland rounding out the tier. Look, I think Billy Edwards is a gamer. I just don't know how good Maryland is from a talent standpoint on really both sides of the football. Wisconsin, without Tyler Van Dyke, looked ugly. I'm not going to hold it too much against him, but you kind of look at Wisconsin and say, what really scares you about Wisconsin. You go back 5 years ago, what scared you was the rushing attack and how good the defense was. Now you look at Wisconsin and say it's a solid football program, but what's their identity as a football team? That was the biggest question mark when Luke Fickell came into Wisconsin. It's like, what is this Wisconsin team going to look like? For the last 15 years, you knew what Wisconsin team you were going to get every single year. Now you don't even know what Wisconsin team you're going to get from a week to week standpoint. And I think not having an identity hurts a team like Wisconsin. Purdue gets shellacked by Notre Dame. That was an angry Notre Dame. We weren't like super high on Purdue coming in. I think they're a better team than they were last year, but I don't think that really says much. So Purdue kind of in that not great category. Minnesota, UCLA, Northwestern. Um, Minnesota I might be a little bit low on. I was really disappointed in that loss to UNC, where it's just like when you played just a solid team, it didn't really look like they had much that scared you on offense. And I don't know if that defense is quite as elite as we kind of thought it was. UCLA, absolutely no identity. And we kind of knew with Deshaun Foster, there was significant work that had to be put in with this roster. But you look at UCLA and say, on offense, they can't really run the football. Garbers is not a guy that you want to lean on in the passing attack. And I think you can say the same thing for Northwestern. That'll round out the Big Ten power rankings. Again, a lot of different ways you could stack these teams. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. I would love to hear from, I don't think it was an Indiana fan. It was just a Big Ten fan that thinks I misevaluated Indiana. Would love to hear from you in terms of that I get Indiana right heading into week 4. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.